Hello, everybody. Welcome to Future Business Forum again. Brian, Rachel, and Tristan here, and this is our regular weekly chat about all things innovative and changing workplace and brand. And what is it you say, Brian? I've forgotten what your strapline is now. Something.
Keeping yourself irresistible.
There you go. Irresistibility. So we're going to have a chat today. I'm going to hand over to Brian and Rachel to say who they are, and we will get into it. Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian from a company called Yellow Yo-Yo. As Tristan was alluding to there, we're specialists in helping service companies manage their brand and all their communication. And we like to think that that we can help people through use of marketing, of design, of strategy, and future thinking, which is what this forum is about. We can help people stay ahead and remain irresistible for a long time for their clients. Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel, and I have a company called Rachel Dempers Limited. I am an executive coach, and I focus on HR consultancy around the future of work. My background is HR, and I just want to help companies survive and thrive the changing times, which is utterly accelerated at the moment. So that's what I do.
And I'm Tristan Allen from Room 44, UK-based innovation agency. Our strapline is future thinking, future proofing, and as Rachel's just mentioned and Brian's mentioned too, now is exactly the right time to be thinking a bit differently about the future. And as you can see, we have a bit of a diversified business stream, because we also have another business that you can see behind me. So that was just a happy serendipity. What we're going to talk about today is various, but I'd like to kick off the conversation by having a chat about the short-term effect of COVID-19 on the businesses that we work with. And it occurred to me this week, and I've written about it already, that the UK government is currently funding business to stay afloat in lots of cases. We've got furlough support, we've got small business grants available, we've got cheap money to borrow that people can access to keep themselves going through this period of low economic activity. And also businesses that occupy commercial premises are possibly able to defer their rent payments. That no one's getting holidays as far as I know, but we are able to benefit from not having to pay just for the moment, at the same time as we're not paying VAT either. And those three things are going to come together at the start of next year in quite a big way. So the effect of low economic activity now is probably going to be felt in 2021. At the end of January, of course, early January, personal tax bills fall due. The end of March, VAT bills for the year will fall due, and also we'll be looking at a full year's non-payment of commercial rents. This is a lot of money that's stacking up in terms of business debt. And I think businesses probably are struggling through at the moment, in some cases doing okay, but in other cases not doing so well at all. And unless we help them to plan for that eventuality by doing something different in their business, it's going to be a nasty moment. And just to finish that thought off, the normal that lots of businesses that we talk to that are trying to get back to probably isn't going to be normal anymore. The world has turned a few times, things have changed, and even COVID-21 could happen. The second spike we may see next year as well, or even sooner. So that's the subject that I'd like to chuck out there for you guys to deal with. I haven't got the answers, obviously, other than for companies to take a look at what they do and to think very, very laterally about the opportunities that may be around them. But let's have a chat about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've taken advantage of the bounce back loan, and we actually just yesterday got our the grant, because we pay rates, and you get you can apply for a grant for that. We also thought about going for the CBIL thing, but never did in the end. But the attitude we've got towards that sort of money, particularly the bounce back loan, is that it was a really easy process. I think the government have got to be applauded for the speed they did these things, which is an interesting another interesting conversation we can have, how you're in a time of strife, the government have actually acted really quickly, which doesn't normally seem to happen in normal life, when they don't have to work hard and get things done. But anyway, they did. And but we're treating the bounce back loan as a insurance policy. So we've got it in an account, but we're keeping it there just in case. We've been lucky. We have clients who are still doing okay, and they're working, and they seem to be loving working with us. So if anything, we're busier now than we were before the time COVID, and people are asking us to help them grow again, to tell people what they do, to be noisy, to keep people aware. But exactly what you said, Tristan. The whole of that, the consequent VAT is due on the 7th of this month, and we are contemplating paying it rather than not paying it. Although you can pay it any time between now and the end of the month, end of the year. So we're thinking of doing that. We're definitely not going to spend any of the bounce back unless things turn in a different direction. And I think we're lucky because things are still going okay. If you're not lucky and you have to use that sort of money, and you're paying 20% of your staff wages still sometimes, and that also, the furlough is actually dropping over the next 3 or 4 months, isn't it? So it's a bigger business with more people, it must be quite a stressful time if your market's not actually, particularly if you're in an industry like the entertainment industry, if you're running a pub or a club or a restaurant in this country, a hairdressing salon, it must be very difficult, quite scary, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a lot has been happening the last few weeks. We've been hit by COVID, trying to work out what we're doing to do with our business or personal situations as well. Kids work, homeschooling. There's all this stuff. We're hopefully going to come through that. But as a business owner, I think you need to understand the pace that you're setting the company. When can you start to think about just even having on the agenda of when are you going to be able to pay things back, or when you're going to start pulling things together, so it doesn't come a great surprise because you've been so consumed by the here and now. I think you need to be able to look ahead and start thinking about what the plans are. Definitely the reading I've done, and in my previous experience, is the more open you are in communication with your teams, the more return you'll get from their productivity. So if the teams understand that life is challenging at the moment, and the teams may want to sacrifice more of their time to help the business, if it means that they get to stay in their jobs and they might be working longer, or they might end up with more creative ideas. So I think it's definitely around pace and planning and open communication with your staff, so they understand what's ahead. Because also, if people don't know, then there'll be all the rumours, and people will spend time having those chats rather than focusing on what needs to be done to keep the business afloat and to keep it driving forward.
I think it's interesting what you both said. I mean, the point that Brian made about the government behaving very proactively at the start of this, when we run innovation workshops, design thinking is our methodology. So we're trying to look at things from a consumer perspective or the end user perspective. And I think what the government did during the course of those workshops has some similarity, which is that during a part of the process, we'll try and do a scenarios planning exercise where ideas that come out of the work are put side by side, and then the teams will approach them as if they were a competitor, a new startup, when there are no rules, you can do whatever you want, and another business model. And it feels like the government just said, what would we do if nothing was in the way to stop us? And they've done it. And Rishi Sunak came to the podium and said, we can do all this stuff for you. Bugger the cost, but we'll just do it now, and then we'll deal with the fallout later. That was quite interesting for me. And I don't know if you saw, but locally in Milton Keynes in the last few days, there's been a business failure in a processed food company that services sandwich bars and garages with pre-packed sandwiches and convenience foods. They've got a production unit here, and they've gone under. And I know from personal experience, having tried to access that company for about 10 years now with new ideas, they just were not receptive to any new approach. So they will have no idea what I was trying to tell them, because they didn't even get on the phone. And that's trying various people at various times. So the culture there was very, very closed. They were going to do what they do until the cows come home. And now suddenly there are no more cows, and they've actually folded. And it's a significant business failure for the town, city, whatever. So the two attitudes, just to me, illustrate what can be done and what should be done versus everybody trying to cling on to what they used to do. And I think there's definitely a case for opening. And I know that I would say this, wouldn't I? Because we're an agency and we sell service, etc. But I think sometimes it's necessary to take outside advice just to broaden the perspectives that are available to your teams to even to consider. Because if you're in a room having worked on a thing for a long time, that's what you'll work on. And of course, there are lots more business models that could be transposed into every industry from adjacent spaces.
Yeah.
We try, broaden their view of stuff if we can, if we're invited to.
But I saw, talking of the government again, I saw a talk recently by a Bank of England official, and he was talking. He was asked a question: how did they work out quite how much they might have to spend? What was the process? Was it just as you say? Did Rishi Sunak, did they think, right, we're just going to open the coffers, we're going to do these processes, and we'll sort it out later? And they have internally, they have stress tests all the time, where they're testing the economy against potential disasters. And the last stress test they did was at the end of 2019. And it was based on a contagion, funnily enough, or something similar. And so they'd been through this whole process. And so they worked out the level of debt amongst the big corporates, the level of cash richness, how many months of cash flow did they have to make sure their business could survive. And they had a percentage through the year, all the way through to to the end of 2021, of where there would be stresses, how many big companies had 3 months cash, how many had 4, 5, 6. So they did that, and then they had this other mitigating thought, which was the banks are far richer now than they were when the financial crash happened in 2007-8. They've upped their coffers; they're much more buoyant, and therefore they were more able to help. And it was really reassuring to them. Of course, it could all be a load of post-rationalisation after they'd done it, but it was really, really reassuring in terms of the process they'd gone through, and that I found even more amazing, that they'd managed to do that really quickly. I think it had helped. Obviously, they'd done the stress test; they could bring it forward, they could use the data. But they, and then they were asked, he said, how does Brexit affect it? What happens to Brexit? Which you didn't mention, Chris, but that's still around. And he said, well, they've had to assume there's a deal done. So if there isn't a deal done, then all bets are off the table, because that is an added pressure on the whole economy if that happens. And the government are saying to Europe they don't want an extension. That I don't understand, but yeah. So I think, and the other thing I'd like to talk about, which adds a bit more of a frisson to it, I saw something on Facebook. Somebody had put a post up to say they're talking about the pubs and clubs and so on opening in July or something at the end of July. It said, before you rush back into Wetherspoons, this was a post on Facebook. Just remember that the guy that runs Wetherspoons sacked everybody and refused to pay them. There are lots of other places to go. And I think that the actions that people have taken for some brands are going to come back and hit them.
Yeah.
You know, particularly among certain age groups. And I think that's an added pressure. You know, people are probably, you know, well, maybe not regret. I don't think Tim Wetherspoon will regret it because it's not in his nature. You know, that is something else that people have got to think about. And I think anybody that's put themselves out to help and open their arms to, you know, to help when it might have harmed themselves, well, that, you know, they're going to do better than the others. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think the furlough is an interesting topic, whether if it's an employer who's furloughed their employees, how well do they treat those employees throughout the entire experience? And that will impact their reviews on Glassdoor. And therefore, when you want to get the top talent, when you start hiring again, or you change direction of your company and you want super duper talent, they will review it. So that's going to be a huge challenge. But also, as you said, with the brand, Edelman Trust Barometer did a review during COVID. I think it was in April time, and they came back talking about brand and saying trust is massively important, and people want to be trusting brands who look after their wellness and their financial security. So they want to ensure that wherever they spend their money, their company have treated their employees correctly, and that they know they're going to be looked after with whatever they choose to spend their hard-earned money on, or they've saved their money. So there's lots of different challenges. So I think you're right, coming out of this, brands are going to have to be very mindful.
Well, I put on LinkedIn yesterday, again in a blog that I wrote about local. Local is the new brand equity that consumers are going to be valuing. I think if a national operator, like I've done, just picking one, costs the coffee shops that exist on every high street. You know, if the people that used to go to Costa and that Costa didn't used to worry about, if the people who went to Costa are now going to an independent that Costa didn't worry about before, then they may want to be thinking again about that. I've got no reason for picking Costa in particular, it's just one name. But I think people are being mindful of their choices. And I think we discussed last time as well that the bakery down the road and the deli down the road that is making it possible for people to order online and have stuff delivered locally will retain a high degree of that loyalty from its local clientele. And I think that's a great thing, because we know that the ubiquity of the high street, or the homogeneity of the high street, is a bit boring across many parts of the UK and probably the world too. So those independents that can now thrive better because they've had this opportunity to shine in the consumer's mind is a great thing. But the Brexit thing as well, I mentioned that, didn't mention it today, but I have done previously, where this month, actually in June, if the government isn't able to sort out its fisheries agreement in June, and if the Northern Irish issue hasn't been resolved, at least in outline, by the end of June, July, then we are probably going to end up with a no-deal Brexit. That's what the pundits are saying. And this was an article on the Guardian Today in Focus podcast a couple of days ago. Very, very well informed piece of journalism, and we're not that far away from that also being a major factor in what happens in quarter one next year.
Yeah.
You know, we're 6 months out. We're not. I think everybody is still. If you've been lucky enough to get a CBIL payment or a loan to tide you over, then it's going to be fine. But the time's going to come when it's not fine anymore. And I wonder just how much some companies have mortgaged their future for the benefit of short-term expediency.
I think you're right. I think probably a lot of them had to. You know, to survive, they've had to. And you just hope. There's the pressure, isn't it? You know, you've survived for this period of time. We're going to have a really turbulent period in the first quarter of 2021 for lots of reasons, and if you go back to doing what you were doing before, you're not listening to you're not talking to your staff. You're sticking to what you did. You know, you haven't been talking to your clients. You know, so you haven't been interesting. You haven't been marketing at all, which a lot of people have. You know, normally what happens in stress, when you haven't got much money, that's the first thing you pull in, which is always a mistake. You know, and you start to try and unfurl and start again. That's going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
You know, not just financially, but operationally, fiscally. You know, and you're right, Tris. The three. It's a lot of convergence of issues, isn't it? And on top of that, the recession. You know, and interestingly, the Bank of England chappie was saying that in their estimation, you know, the curve will be back on track by the end of the year 2021. That's their best, and that's if we get a deal with Brexit. But it might not be the V that everybody's talking about, and more of a shallow, almost Nike-like tick. So it's a bit of a swoosh rather than a V. But the trouble is that nobody knows, do they? Nobody's ever been through this, so nobody knows. I just know that we've not quite handled it as well as other people. I think it's particularly interesting how many governments with women in front and as leaders have actually done really well. You know, Ms Ardern down in New Zealand, who seem to have handled it in a much better way. Yeah, so it's again, I don't know whether you can think is any good reason for that, Rachel?
Couldn't possibly say. The trend is, there is a trend. There's definitely a trend. So you can read into it whatever you like, but there is a trend. So
New York Times yesterday had an article in it that was mentioning Boris Johnson alongside, and I can't remember the term they called him, not an imperialist, but they were sort of citing him alongside Trump, Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Putin as the type of leader where Putin disappeared altogether with COVID. You didn't see him, so he retracted. Trump just didn't believe it was happening. Bolsonaro was a mini Trump, and our esteemed leader just was too late in getting things going. You know, we should have locked down at the beginning of March rather than the end. Although he said it was through scientific. So it's interesting how the rest of the world, or the Americans at least, are looking at our leaders and linking them with those three nice chaps. I don't know whether that's quite as merited as it is, but I just found it as interesting. I was almost sort of bristling, thinking, "Oh, he's not that bad," or maybe he is. I don't know.
Great. Look, we've gone for our 20 minutes. We're going to keep this one short and sweet, I think. So thanks for your time, guys. I think when we come back, I'd like to dig back into this subject a bit more, and maybe we can talk about that local brand equity subject, and also maybe how the decoupling of economies that's predicted may aid and assist that. We'll have a chat before we come online next time, perhaps, and maybe we can pick the conversation up next week.